My first question for you here is, like, why are you doing this? Like the theme throughout your career has been building these schools. I'm just curious as to like what happened early in your career as to like where this thesis came from in educating people.
Yeah, it's funny because growing up, I was the least likely person to ever run a school. I skipped all my classes, was never a good student. I mean, I got good grades, but I rarely went to school.
Yeah.
And honestly, I had a pretty miserable experience the entire time. So, back when I was teaching myself how to code, I lived in a car in Silicon Valley while I was teaching myself, and really it was sheer accident. If I'm being honest, I had no interest in education. I kept waiting for somebody else to come do something about the thing that was frustrating me. And there are a lot of people who are really good at the academic side of education. Yeah. They're good at teaching people. All the research has been there for a really long time. Nothing has been too dramatically different. What was broken has always been either the business model or the system that education operates within. It's either government funded or government sponsored in the US or, government paid for in one way or another. And so you find that eventually that's where everything breaks. But Gauntlet specifically, if I'm being totally honest, which I haven't admitted this to many people, I was ready to be done with education. I was like, it's just too broken. I don't see a path through without regulators crushing any innovation that you try to do. It's, they'll reject every application for a charter school that's interesting. They'll deny accreditation for anything. And so you're competing against effectively free money. And that's just a nigh impossible thing to do. That's the fundamental reason that education hasn't really changed that much in the United States. It's all government backed one way or another. There are chinks in the armor that are showing now of that. It's gotten so bad on the government sponsored side that there are windows of opportunity for other folks. And I think for us, honestly, if AI hadn't come along exactly when it had, I probably wouldn't be in education anymore.
Did you dropping out of school, of higher education, prompt working in this area? Were you frustrated on how higher education was working? And
yeah, I mean, basically what happened is, I dropped out of school. Was living in a tiny town in the middle of nowhere in Utah. And when I dropped out of school, I had no credentials, no degree, and I started making six figures in Silicon Valley, which you later realize making $100,000, it's making more than that, but six figures in San Francisco isn't six figures in the rest of the world. But yeah, people from, small town Utah would be reaching out to me like, how do I do what you did? And it was a really, living in a car is not what I would recommend to the vast majority of people. So it started with me and a buddy just helping a handful of friends try to break into the industry, and it kind of organically spread from there. And then pretty quickly we realized the problem was, requiring people to pay a ton of money out of pocket for education was just never going to scale, never going to work, at least in the way that we saw it, and started looking for models that worked better. The business model that Gauntlet has today, I would have killed for in the early days, but it was, without some experience, without some trust of people, that it would probably have been impossible. Yeah. So I think we're pretty lucky.
Why don't you think more? You kind of talked about the regulation and education, as an industry, is very broken. But with as broken as an industry as it is, why aren't more entrepreneurs trying to fix it? It's such an obvious problem. Why aren't more entrepreneurs jumping in?
I think it's the same as any other, highly regulated or difficult, complex. It's a systems level problem. You can't just build a better product and win. And there are a lot of places in the world where you build a better product or you sell it a little bit better and you win. In education, you have to completely rethink everything from first principles. You have to approach the market differently. Your sales process is different. Your product is different. So it's just a more difficult problem. And historically, the stakes have not been as high as people would like, because you run up against the ceiling of, okay, but there's a free alternative for everybody. Who's going to pick the paid version over the free version? no one's been able to make something that's better enough versus the norm that it wins at scale. I think we're starting to see that now. And there've been, a few like $1 billion, but like, in education, the biggest successes have been like a couple billion here or there. In SaaS, it's like, they're $100 billion companies all over the place. So it just has been a smaller pond to fish in. I do think when you look at the raw numbers of how much money goes into education, how much of GDP is, primary, secondary, post-secondary training in the United States, it's massive. It's just really difficult nut to crack.
Yeah. Everything you've worked on has been purely vocational. And I think that like one of the problems right now is that like higher education institutions are this big bundling of so many different functions. There's like the research aspect, and then there's the vocational aspect, and then there's just building better world models for students, right? And I've talked to people at like UATX, which is like right down the street here, and they're very much focused on like, we want to help you build a better world model or teach you how to see the world. They're kind of less focused on the vocation. They still are, but less focused on that. Do you think that they should be separated? Like, do you think like the bundling of what a university is, like in my mind, I think you could like privatize a lot of it by like separating vocational schools to like something like Gauntlet, and then privatizing the research to like there are private research institutions. Do you think that's how it should be broken up?
Yeah, I don't know exactly how all the pieces should be broken up. I'm very careful within education to say, I don't understand the research side enough to know exactly what should happen there. And it's funny, when we first got started, everybody like the borders of the other stuff starts to try to creep into what you're doing, because right now at the university level, everything is all just one giant mishmash of everything. And the kind of the great frustration that happens at the higher education level is people are going to the same institution with very different goals. And, if you look at, I've talked to a bunch of university presidents that are like, I'm so frustrated that, I'm getting all of this blame for the student job numbers on the other side. Like, I never said anything about, promising jobs, or in some instances, I won't name names, but there are presidents of major public universities that are like, I hate this particular program within my school, but I can't shut it down because I have a gazillion tenured professors and they, are going to suck X dollars. So if I don't pull tuition money into that part of the, of the school, then it's just a giant black hole of money. And it's like, don't feel great about it, but like, I have to keep that cycle kind of going. So it is, I don't know what the solution is. I do think for us, we had to say, this is who we are. This is what we do. We don't have to be the be all end all solution to everything. I think that's one thing that kills a lot of education companies is the surface area is so broad that you try to do everything all at once and then you do nothing. So for us, we said very specifically, we're not focused on making you a better person. We're not focused on ethics. We're not focused on, at times we will accidentally help you understand the world a little bit differently, but we're focused on vocation. We're focused on helping you make the most money you can, be in the best place to contribute to the economy that we can. And if you want to read Shakespeare, we have nothing against Shakespeare, but that's just not what we do, right? And I think, I do think it will be more unbundled. But the generic bundle right now includes enough of everything. And I do think it's tricky that most people going to like a higher education institution, they can't even quantify out in their mind what it is that they're looking for. They're looking for some sort of generic experience that helps them grow and develop and figure out what they want to be and who they want to become. And we're not that. We're, you know who you are, you know who you want to be, or whether you do or don't, it doesn't really matter to me. We're going to help you become the best engineer that you can, or the best AI, whatever that we can.
Yeah. For a lot of my friends that are in universities right now, they are very much there for the piece of paper that they think they can get the job after. Like they're there for the vocational aspect.
Yeah.
And it's just like, they never promised
I
you
think
any
that's-
vocational training.
Yeah, that's just the base case. Yeah, that's where the biggest misalignment happens right now is you have to go to, like, if you were to ask the average person why they're going to college, it's to get a job. They think that they have to in order to be a valuable member of society, but mostly it's to get a job. And if you ask the university what they're doing, it's generic and it's rarely, if ever, job oriented. So there's just a complete like mismatch of those priorities. And sometimes a lot of the time you get away with it, but sometimes you very much don't. And then on the government side, you know, all the funding and all of the student loans, that is all backed by this is what people need in order to get a job. That's all a financial motivation. And so the incentives of everybody are just completely misaligned, and it's really bad. But no one's going to stop the student loan program because you can't, you know, prevent people from getting good jobs. And no one's going to tell the universities that they need to become vocational schools because that's not what a university is. And no one's going to tell, you can tell students whatever you want. They're doing whatever's in their best interest according to themselves. So it's just a really sticky mess right now.
I think the biggest problem, like governmentally, or at least, I mean, I'm a young person, and I have lots of friends who have gone to these universities and end up just in massive debt. And like I think it's a crime almost. One, and I think that like getting federal student loans out of the government is like maybe the biggest thing you could do. It was just never going to happen because like you're taking away job ability from.
I mean, I've talked with, you know, I've been at the highest levels of the White House and the federal, you know, the people who are literally responsible for establishing the student loans, and they'll, with a straight face, tell you like, I know exactly which loans are going to completely screw people over for the rest of their lives. But I'm powerless to stop giving those loans because then that's you're being selective or that's not equitable or whatever. So there are many, many instances where everybody knows, from the government to if there's a private lender to the school to everybody other than the student knows that student is heading on a path to ruin, but nobody does anything about it.
Yeah,
and it's just, and in many instances they're forbidden from doing so by law. So yeah, that problem's not going to reverse itself anytime soon unless there's sweeping change. The point that makes the most sense is at the student loan level. Like, it has to be at the federal government saying, hey, maybe when we see a student loan that we know is going to screw somebody over for the rest of their lives, maybe we should be able to not give that loan.
It's a wild idea. I mean, it's absolutely a wild idea.
Until then, nothing changes.
Yeah. Just from like a founder journey of yourself, how is the impact you've made on whatever challenges here? Before we get into Gauntlet and like the business model, educational model, how have you felt impact-wise with this program compared to others? Because I believe with Lambda and like previous iterations of like Bloom Tech, they've all been virtual, yeah?
Correct.
Yeah. So has this felt different? Just this in-person model, has this felt like impact-wise for you? Like seeing the actual impact you're making on these people, how has that felt, I guess?
Yeah, it is interesting. It's very different. So this is the first time I've ever done anything. I mean, we had an in-person office in San Francisco and in Utah, but that was all just our employees. So the most contact I ever had with students was, I mean, like, we had enough scale that I would reliably run into somebody on the street, or if I go to the gym, I will see someone that was a student. And so, I mean, it does become like, I think if you look at the press of what the experience was like, there's a very negative bias there for sure. But even to this day, probably once a week, somebody will run into me and be like, "Hey, thank you so much. This has changed my life." But that's rare and fleeting, and most of the people you don't actually get to meet. Where this, like, it feels 1,000 times better. And yeah, you actually get to meet people. In many instances, you meet their families. You get to know them at a deeper level. It's obviously a lot more expensive, but I don't think I would go back to just online. Like, it made sense. The economics are obviously a gazillion times better. It expands opportunity to people that can't, drop everything and move to a random city for a few months. But the level of connection, the level of like, just feeling what's going on. And interestingly, like the number of times I've had a conversation with somebody at Gauntlet where they're like, oh, this is like, you are so different than I thought you were. And Gauntlet is so different than I thought it was when we were in the remote section. Because we start Gauntlet with 3 weeks of remote, and then we fly everybody together. And the number of people that have said like, oh, I was like, this is 1,000 times better in person is not small. To a person, everybody agrees with that. And so I do wonder, if Lambda School would have been impossible, but if it were in person, how things might have been different. I do think it would have been different. It still wouldn't have worked for most people, and economically it was kind of, when the government decided to shut down ISAs, like nothing was working in the first place, but I think it could have been different. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you do before I want to do separate business model and then the educational model of how Gauntlet works, but can you just do like a 10-second, like 2-sentence, like what it is?
Yeah. I mean, the short version of Gauntlet is we take existing engineers from all over the world. We fly them here to Austin. We put them up in housing. We give them food. We, cover all of the compute costs, which I say that and it sounds small. It's actually more expensive than the housing and the food in many instances because we use a lot of AI. And it's completely free for the students. So we don't charge the students anything ever, no matter what. And that is the single best part of my day is I don't have to go chase students to pay me anything. And then on the flip side, we make money by charging companies recruiting fees, basically. So companies, right now, a company has to pre-sign up and prepay in order just to get access to the cohort because we sell out from a company perspective before the cohort begins. So companies pay us, they come here, they meet everybody. They all fight over who they get to hire, and that's how we make our money. So
yeah. So on this business model thing, I think also throughout your career, like building all these different schools, like the number one problem has been aligning the incentives.
Yeah, and that's what I think about when I wake up in the morning, what I think about when I go to sleep at night.
Right.
I'm the biggest believer in incentives that you will ever find.
Yeah, and I think that like the reason I'm so obsessed with how this place operates, and I talked to Ash a lot about this too, it's just like the incentives here are incredibly aligned. And I'll talk about the educational model in a second, but how did you stumble across this model? And everyone I tell, I have lots of friends in universities who are taking like CS degrees and like struggling to get internships, struggling to get jobs. And I'll tell them about this. And one, they probably hadn't heard of it. And two, they're like, no way. Like it's impossible. I'm not going with like scam, whatever.
Yeah.
How is this possible?
It is. I mean, to be very clear, we were unsure if it was possible until about 9 months ago. So it's not the first time I've thought of this business model. Like, hey, what if you just train people and the company's paid for everything? A million people have thought of that, right? But actually making those ends meet and crossing all of those paths to where it makes sense is the difficult part. And the thing that we were missing for a very long time was there are a couple things that were off. So with Lambda School and Bloom Tech, when we used income share agreements, that was the student was still paying for tuition out of a percentage of their income, and that was a roundabout way of charging the employer, right? Like you're effectively reducing what the student is making in order to pay for the education. There's some complexities around that are ideal because it scales really well. There's some complexities that aren't ideal, which is you have to get students to pay you, which I don't like. The students don't like. And that it changes the relationship on the minute a student gets hired under that model, they become your enemy, and that sucks. Like that really sucks. That with Gauntlet, it's so nice for me that I never have to turn around and start charging the students anything. Like seriously, you can probably see it in my face. That's just so much better. And what we were missing from doing that was two things. One is we were always training at the very junior side of the spectrum. So we were taking people from stocking shelves at Walmart to being a software engineer. You can do that, and there's so many thousands of people that, when I run into them, they're like, oh my gosh, I was making minimum wage. Now I'm making six figures. This is, completely different life. And we did that thousands and thousands, we increased lifetime earnings by billions and billions of dollars. But that's very, very difficult to do. And you can't take a company and be like, hey, see that guy stocking shelves at Walmart? You should cover their tuition. They're not willing to take that risk yet. So we had to be the intermediary taking the risk. Now we do take some risk, but it's not as big. Like, we're taking people that the companies are trying so desperately to hire that they are used to paying for it. So that's one piece is, at the junior level, no one really pays recruiter fees ever for a junior. When you go more senior or specific, swaths of engineering, companies are already like our sales pitch is so simple to companies. It's, hey, we have really smart people. They work really hard. They're really good at AI. And they say, okay, how much does it cost? You say, yeah, it's a normal recruiting fee. Done. We do have to make them prepay it. And, there's some song and dance around that. And at different times we require them to purchase multiple at a time, and they may not like that. And, you have to do it ahead of time, which they don't like. But it's a relatively straightforward pitch. The only reason it was possible is because for the first cohort, we had a company that we had been working with, training their engineers for about a year. So they believed in us. They believed in our quality of training. They had seen us train their engineers. And frankly, they placed a if you were to zoom out and look at the bet that they placed on Gauntlet, I think for that first cohort alone, it's probably a $20 million bet. Because they covered all the costs of the first cohort. We didn't have the funds to cover that. So they flew everybody out. They housed everybody. They fed everybody. They covered the office. We were just the service providers of everything. And they guaranteed the jobs on the other side. Obviously we work with them on the admissions standards and what the standards would be to keep moving through the program. But that's something I would have killed for at any point in the past decade. And it wasn't an option. At most we had, companies like Amazon that would agree to interview everybody, and they would set internal metrics that they would hire X%, but they didn't want us to expose that to everybody, or then, it kind of conflates things in the market. But the other thing that does is it makes it so that my job is not, the student isn't my customer. So I'm not trying to please the students. I'm trying to please the companies. And the way that I make the companies happy is by making the students as good as they can possibly be.
So basically, the entire responsibility falls on you, like as an institution, to make the best possible engineer. Which, like, that is the big problem. It's like every school has no incentive to make sure they do a good job, and all the incentive is on you guys to make sure that every person that comes out of this program is top quality.
Correct. Yep.
Yeah.
And that does, that changes your admission standards for sure, right? Like it's not just, hey, well, I agree to accept money from this person. Like, that's pretty tempting to just say yes. It's, am I willing to bet that, and we can get into this part of the business model later, but like, I'm willing to bet that this person, if they get through to the end of the program, is going to be hired by a company, because if not, then we hire them. And they work for and that happens very, very rarely. But, when we look at everybody coming in and everybody as they're going through the program, we're saying, are they at the level that we need them to be at so that it's a slam dunk when the companies come in and start meeting them? So it's very, very different. And like I said, if a student comes to me and complains that what we're asking of them is really hard, I say, yeah, of course. Instead of, trying to I'm not customer support for a student necessarily. I'm trying to make them as happy as I can. I will make them happy if I can. I must make them great. And that's very, very different than when a student is your customer.
Yeah. No, I think it's super cool. So cohort 3 is just kicking off. It starts Monday?
Monday. Yep.
Yeah. I came to visit during cohort 2, and I talked to a lot of what you call them challengers. And there were a lot of people from varying experiences. Some had like very little coding experience. Some had lots of coding experience. Can you talk about just the numbers from cohort 2, and then you changed the qualifications you needed, I guess, for cohort 3?
Yeah. So the way to think about this is each cohort will shift around what the qualifications are, and it's really us mapping back to what the needs of the hiring companies are. So in cohort 2, cohort 1, we had 3 hiring companies that we were working with, really one big sponsoring company. And they were kind enough in the first cohort to let a few other companies come in and hire a handful of folks so that we could kind of test what the market was like outside of that. We didn't know if this was going to be just an internal training program for that company until the end of time. And I think if, they offered and wanted that, right? If I would have said, yeah, let's just, keep running this just for you, they would still be running it just for them. But they were really gracious and, allowed a few other companies to come in the first cohort. And all those companies, came in, they hired somebody and they turned around and said, awesome, where can we sign up for more? So the big shift for us was between cohort 1 and cohort 2. We had to go from one company footing all the bills and hiring everybody, and they paid us a per person that they hired fee after they stayed for a certain amount of time, to us running the entire program and us finding the companies. And they were going to be one of the companies that hired, but they ended up being 10% of that cohort, not 95%. And so the cohort 2, we had, I think a little more than 20 different companies that were hiring, and because of our business model, in order to be a hiring company, you had to prepay us. So you had to commit upfront to how many you were going to hire and write us a check before the cohort started. We were not sure if that was going to be possible. It turned out it worked beautifully. And cohort 3 was just a continuation of that, to where we could say, okay, now we have a base of 20 companies that we're starting with. Some of them hired everybody they need to for the next year. Some of them need to hire some more in the next cohort. We brought in, we'll be a little north of 40 companies in the second cohort, but we're really trying to, in real time, adjust to what those companies' needs are. So when companies say, hey, we need somebody that does X, Y, Z, we try to make sure that the students coming in are X, Y, Z. So all that is to say, our admissions criteria will change cohort to cohort. For this cohort, we required 3 years of experience as an engineer, which does limit the opportunity to a smaller subset of people. And we tried to find bets that we can make that are a sure thing for people with less experience. So we still reserve around 10% of each cohort to that. So that could be someone who's 18 or straight out of college, or we should have to limit that number, because what the hiring companies are looking for generally is someone who's used to being an engineer. And if we have them expecting that, and then we show them, hey, here are 75 recent college grads, they get pretty frustrated. But we're figuring out how to kind of layer those in together and have different levels, because we have seen, when we're working with junior people, those are oftentimes extremely successful. We just have to limit our risk exposure to that at any given time, I suppose.
The last thing on business model here is I want to talk about one, scalability just for engineers, right? And then how you see, in my mind, this could work across disciplines, right? So vocational AI training, at scale across disciplines is the dream, right? And I think this can replace a lot of this, not replace, but I think it overall improves how young people are sent into the workforce. They gain economic value. Can you talk about scalability of this model just for engineers? And then if you've thought, obviously, of across disciplines too.
Yeah, for sure. So there are a couple kind of cross sections that really matter here. And one of them is really core to the thesis of what Gauntlet AI is. And so the first one is that, one of the fundamental beliefs of Gauntlet is that there is a small number of people who produce the vast majority of economic impact in any company, in any country, and there's literally unlimited demand for those people. And Gauntlet, as it is right now, is set to find and refine that handful of people. So that is an inherently unscalable, will forever be unscalable. I mean, to be fair, from a, if you look at it from a revenue standpoint, it can still become a reasonably sized business. But I think, we probably cap out with this version of what Gauntlet is at maybe a couple thousand graduates a year. It's probably max, just because we're so restrictive on, I could be wrong. Who knows? But that's what it's looking like right now. Now, to be fair, we make more than $50,000 from each grad. So you could be, you could have 1,000 grads a year and do 50 million a year in revenue. That's not nothing. So, a couple thousand is still 100 million a year in revenue. It's, again, not nothing. But that solves, a revenue and scalability problem for us. That doesn't solve, it's a very, very tiny number relative to, the number of people who are looking for more economic opportunity, for sure. So the next layer of that we will be getting into next year is, right now, we're just for engineers, right? There's the rest of the company, but still trying to find those handful of people that really move the needle for the company in different various operational roles that are not engineering specifically. So we will be expanding to that. We'll start with some small pilots. The difficult part there is figuring out exactly what that means, exactly what the training looks like, and does it look like Gauntlet for accounting? Does that look like Gauntlet for marketing? We are doing a small experiment, this cohort, with a handful of marketers. But is it specific Gauntlet training for every role in the company, or is there a Gauntlet technical, Gauntlet non-technical? We don't know all the details of that yet. But certainly, I think our thesis is that there are a handful of people that really make the vast majority of the impact in any company. And some of those are engineers. Right now we're focused on, finding and training and identifying and refining those engineers. And the next layer is doing that with people who aren't engineers. And then what to do with the rest of the economy, it's way too early for me to say yet. Yeah.
This is kind of an unrelated question to the greater vision, but obviously you're training engineers here using AI. If you some people's AGI timelines are like that could be a bottleneck here. It's like, how long do you need engineers?
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I'm at the same time very optimistic about AI and very pessimistic about AI. The analogy I use is, I have a Tesla Model Y, and I don't drive myself really anywhere anymore. The Tesla drives me everywhere. When Tesla put the best engineers in the world and all the compute imaginable on that problem a decade ago, everybody wondered when that would happen, and it took about a decade. Probably a couple decades if we're being honest. I think engineering will follow a similar time frame where it's going to feel so close but so far for quite a while. And then honestly, my mental model is I don't know what. It's a fool's errand to predict what 10 years from now looks like in AI timelines. I can't predict what's going to happen 2 months from now. So we may shift. We may be, if you would have asked me how much code AI would be able to write 3 years ago, I would have way underestimated. So our mental model is we want to get people to the cutting edge of AI and just ride that wave. And as long as we're doing that, then we'll be in a good spot. I don't know what will happen macroeconomically with, engineering, hiring. I do think it's entirely possible that there's just more and more demand and more software, and there's just more and more of everything over time. But I don't know.
Yeah. On the education, I want to talk. I don't know if I should ask you about like the marketing little thing, because I'm sure it's like very up in the air of like what that looks like, what that means. With engineering on like the education model, it's pretty objective. Like you're able to build this or you're not. With marketing, it's like definitely more fuzzy, right? So like, one, do you have like, I guess what are companies looking for skill wise, like in a marketer?
Yeah, I think so. Yes, engineering is a more discrete, measurable thing, but I think what people are really looking for is the same, and that is increasing the output of your best people and expanding the surface area of what those people are able to do. So if I look at there's the the raw engineering output of write more code, right? That's not necessarily the goal. It's actually create more product or write better code, or and what is really happening is you're taking what used to require, in the best instances in engineering, you're taking what used to be a team of 5 or 6 people, and now one person can do all of that work a lot more quickly. I think what we're seeing in marketing, as an example, is something similar, where it used to be, here's the performance marketer, and he would send, off for, here's my creative brief. I need someone to design this, and then I need a motion guy to create this video, and then I'm going to analyze all of the stuff. And so it's just becoming, the expectations are more. And, in an ideal world, companies would love to see, hey, what used to have to be a team of 4 or 5 marketers is now 1 AI marketer. I think we will see that. Or, there's more fractional expertise that matters here and there, but you have 1 person able to do a lot more with a lot less. I definitely think that's going to be the case. It's still early there, but if you look at like, if you break apart marketing as a whole, it's, are you able to understand the customer and create messaging and get that in front of those people? AI is pretty good at each of those things independently. Someone who can put all those things together really well, and the devil's always in the details, the same as it is with engineering. That's pretty difficult to do, but obviously really valuable. So we'll see.
Yeah. I haven't like personally been through the curriculum here, so correct me if I'm wrong here, but something I really like is that it seems to be like very agency inducing. It's like there's not actually much instruction happening. It's like more, here's a project, here's a very strong deadline. If you can't do this in this time, you're out. And like, but there's like a pot of gold at the end, and it's just like it is up to the individual to be resourceful, use AI. Like it's now possible with AI, right? Can you talk about like this? It seems almost like non-education education. It's like very self-learning driven. Was that intentional from the beginning?
So I think it is later on in the program. In the first few weeks, there's a lot more. So if you look at like lecture time versus work time, we're always like 1 to 5, 1 to 10. Like there's always way more time to implement the stuff that we're talking about than to like sit in a lecture. But it does, in the early days, it's very scaffolded, and we pick projects that we can easily verify whether you've learned the stuff that you need to learn, and the project that you're doing is very aligned with what the lectures are, to kind of get the fundamentals in place. And over time, that scaffolding kind of falls off. So even by like week 3 or 4, there's just a lot more free roaming and discovery based stuff. To be totally blunt, by week 9 or 10, toward the end of the program, our staff is running around to students asking, "What did you do there? Like, how did you do that?" Because AI has moved. We have to rewrite the curriculum every single cohort, and sometimes we have to rewrite it halfway through the cohort because everything changes that quickly. And sometimes you have curriculum that you wrote a week ago that's now out of date. It happens all the time. We obviously use a lot of AI in generating our curriculum in specific ways that actually work well, which is not obvious or easy. But we start off very scaffolded, and then at the end of the day, our goal is to get people to the edge of the cutting edge of AI, and then just ride that wave. And that wave is real. Like it will, you need to spend, if you're trying to stay up to date in AI, if you're an engineer, it probably takes at least an hour a day of study and research just to stay up to date. That's not if you're behind. That's like if you're on the cutting edge today, it takes that amount of work. That's very unfamiliar to anything that anybody's ever done from, both from a vocational education standpoint and just from a work standpoint. Like some people come in and they feel bad about how much time they're spending on Twitter or reading research papers because they're like, I need to be building my project right now. And I'm like down this nerd sniped rabbit hole of like reading this paper that just came out. It's like, no, you have to do that. That's like, that is, that would happen just out of sheer level of interest in the past. But like now we have to mandate that. We have to mandate like you need to spend an hour just keeping up with what came out yesterday. And that sounds crazy, but it's real. So that's very different. So yeah, all that is to say, by the end of Gauntlet, they're teaching us, not the other way around, which is something that I'm very uncomfortable and unfamiliar with, but it's just reality.
Can you talk about some of the urgency and like extreme high expectation part of this? That this program is 80 to 100 hours. Like that's what it says, and you're very clear about that. And I mean, when I visited before, I was not here at like normal working hours, and like this
people
place.
don't believe that until until you show up at 11 p.m. and the building is full, and you're like, oh my gosh, that like. Yeah, so we generally show up at 8 or 9 a.m. and we're here until midnight, 6 days a week, and then we show up at noon on Sundays and we're here till midnight. And that's not a joke. Like if you walk, you're welcome to swing by and knock on the doors of Gauntlet at 11 p.m. when a cohort's in session. It will be full, and people don't believe me until they see it. So there is some of that's just what it takes to get to the cutting edge of AI. Like there's so much that we need to catch people up on and so much that you need to learn that even if I give you all of the curriculum, you don't really understand it until you're building with it and you feel it. And, by the end of Gauntlet, people are like, oh, I know when I need to use this type of model for this type of a thing. And I know when, that's not going to work and I need to build a harness around. There's a little bit of an art to it. But beyond that, I think one of the unspoken things about Gauntlet that is probably the coolest that we do is you just learn to rewrite your expectations for what's possible and what's a reasonable timeline. The best example that I can give of that is on day one, we give you a project. We teach you it's like introduction to AI driven development. It's like a 90-minute lecture that's like super information packed. And it's for engineers to get a little bit, get your feet wet using AI development workflows and whatever else. And then we give you a project, which is usually, a big enterprise application that you need to build a clone of. And you need to do that using AI. You can't write any code. AI has to write all of the code. And people are like, all right, we need to do that in a week. And it's like, yes, we're going to do that in a week. And the second half of the week is going to be adding in AI features. And your deadline for the MVP is in 24 hours. Good luck. And everybody starts freaking out. And that first day is, we'll see 10% of a cohort drop out and just say that's impossible and unreasonable. We'll see, weeping, wailing, and gnashing of teeth. And like that basically pace it's important for a number of reasons, but perhaps the biggest reason is, especially if you're an engineer coming in a big corporate environment, a company like that would never in a million years dream of asking something like that be done in 24 hours. And when you see that done in 24 hours, you're like, oh, wow. It was actually a lot of fun. In the second cohort, we had there's always like the handful of people that come to me and they come to Ash and they say, this is like completely unreasonable. This is impossible. And you guys are like assholes for demanding this. And at the same time, we had a bunch of students from cohort one that, they just were in Slack and they jumped into channels that they shouldn't have. And about an hour after we assigned it, we had 2 or 3 of the people from cohort one. They're like, I'm done. And here's my project, everybody. And so everybody could watch that, like, okay, it must not be impossible if cohort one could figure that out in an hour. And you realize, like, there's levels to this. Even if you're a good engineer, you still can't do that in an hour unless you get really, really good at using AI. And that's, it was a good example. But yeah, that that pace and that intensity continues to the point that companies come in and are just blown away by what is possible. And we're blown away sometimes too. We didn't know that it was going to be like that in the first cohort. We didn't know what reasonable was. And we actually condensed a lot of the time frames. In week 1, we gave you a week to build a project and then a week to add AI features. By cohort 2, that was a week to build a project and to add AI features, and it's due in 24 hours. Like the intensity keeps ramping up as AI gets better and as we understand more what we can demand.
You're pretty connected to Alpha and everything that's happening. Also in Austin, which there seems to be some sort of education like revolution going on here. Everyone's kind of like, there's lots of different projects happening. Between the two programs, obviously they're different. Like they're more focused on like the K-12 side, and this is more vocational. But they do rhyme. Like they're very similar principles across, like compressing learning timelines and like focusing on incentives, maintaining extreme high expectations of students. Can you talk to that a little bit? And I guess what's your experience been? Like your kids are at Alpha.
My kids, yeah, they're students at Alpha. I mean, overall experience has been phenomenal. My kids, like the things that Alpha promises are that your kids are going to learn twice as fast in 2 hours a day, and they're going to love learning, and that is true. So true with both of my kids. I talked to my son and my daughter the other day, and like, what if you had to go back to my oldest we've had her in all sorts of different kinds of schools. She's kind of a guinea pig. It's actually the first year she's gone back to a school twice. A lot of that's because of COVID and just moving around and stuff. But like, okay, if you had to go back to the public school you're in just before this, and both my kids, like, I would not go. Like, you cannot force me to go back to that. And then, as we're having this hypothetical conversation, my son, he's probably 2 years and change ahead of curriculum in a lot of places. And he's like, so what, am I going to, if I go back to 3rd grade, are they going to teach me how to multiply? Like, I learned how to multiply like months ago. You're like, that's not that long ago. But so yeah, our experience with Alpha has been, it's phenomenal. It really is everything that it promises. And our kids are huge fans. And that's the academic piece. The thing that my kids love more than the academic piece is the stuff they do afterwards. So last week, we went to their test to pass event, and my son was doing the horseback riding, and my daughter was refinishing furniture, and then did like a magic show. It's all over the place, but it's really cool. Yeah.
What do you make of the argument that like these are obviously new models for education, and what do you make of the argument that like even something like Gauntlet, right, is somewhat sorting for nonconformity? If you took a super bright kid out of high school who like and they want to be an engineer, they're gonna traditionally they're gonna conform to go to one of these higher education institutions. Mm-hmm. What do you make of sorting for nonconformity? And you can say that conformity is rewarded economically, right? But like by companies, sort of.
Yeah.
There's an argument for
yes
that.
Yes and no. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I look at it. So there are a couple questions in that. One is, how do you account for selection bias, right? And like, if you were to take the same people and, so I'll take the Alpha example. They're like, oh, well, yeah, Alpha. The common criticism is, yeah, Alpha has phenomenal outcomes. It's also a school that costs $40,000 a year. Don't you think that any school that costs $40,000 a year would select for kids with, wealthy parents and whatever else, and they're going to be more successful? And the answer is obviously yes, right? Like, no one in their right mind would say, a school that costs $40,000 is going to have equivalent outcomes to a school in the inner city Chicago. Like, no one would ever make that argument. So what you have to look at is, in a theoretical world where that school didn't exist and you either choose the alternative or don't choose anything, what does that look like, right? So a lot of the kids going to Alpha, some of them would be in public school, some of them would be going, across the street to a $40,000 a year private Catholic school or whatever. So you have to kind of compare apples to apples and compare those things to each other. So Alpha, I think, their outcomes crush every other super expensive private school education that exists. The outcomes, they're young of their charter version, crush the other charter and public schools that, so, you remove the selection bias and it still matters. For us, I think that's probably one of our greatest advantages. And I don't, the amount of agency it takes to apply to Gauntlet is not small. The amount of research you have to do to determine if we are a scam or not is not small. The amount of, even like, somebody DM'd me today and they're like, hey, your application is broken. It requires a bunch of URLs, and they tried putting their email address in and it wasn't a URL and it wasn't working. And like this, this is a scam. And I'm like, okay, like if you can't figure out what a URL is to put it in, then like you're going to be filtered out. Like I'm okay with that, So I definitely think that the high agency of Gauntlet is unique. And we filter for that. And the one thing that I've learned in my, decade of being in education is you have to pick exactly what it is you're doing, pick exactly who your audience for that is, and be unapologetic about it. So we're very upfront that we're 80 to 100 hours a week. If you think that that's a terrible idea, that could be right for you. Please don't come. If, we're in Austin, that's a sacrifice for a lot of people. If you don't think like coming to Austin for 100 hours a week and jamming on AI unpaid, and just building stuff to figure out how much you can learn and hopefully getting a job on the other. If you don't think that's awesome, that's totally fine. Please don't come. And there are some psychos out there that think that that's a good time. We want to collect all those psychos. So come all ye crazy people. And if that's not for you, that's okay. And I think, there are also companies on the other side there are companies that come to us and say, hey, we want, 100 engineers that are going to sit in our division of, printer drivers and sit there. And I'm like, they would kill themselves. The people that are coming to Gauntlet would not. So we turn companies down too. So we know who we are. We know what we stand for. And we're looking, it helps that I'm one of those people that would have loved that. And so it's pretty, so is Ash and so is everybody else that, works at Gauntlet. So it's not hard for us to find other crazy people like ourselves. And that doesn't have to be you. That's okay. We're not trying to empire build or solve all of humanity's greatest problems. We know that there's a limit to, who we're addressing and what we're addressing at any given time. So our goal is to be the best thing we can possibly be for that, weird island of misfits. And for the companies that need a weird island of misfits, we'll be that all day long.
The last thing I want to ask you here is more of a meta question on just how this all like unravels. You say you're like not trying to fix like the biggest problems in the world, but however, I do think, you've been in education for a while. I think this problem is a massive one, and I personally believe that education is like one of humanity's biggest levers to like making a more prosperous future. So my question for you here is that if like with the advancements of AI and like being able to scale like a Bloom 2 Sigma type thing, like on the AI tutoring, what's your like most optimistic vision of like 15 to 20 years of how this looks, I guess?
Oh, I think everything's going to be awesome in 15 years. Like I couldn't be more optimistic about the way the world is going to look and the access that everybody will have to everything. My belief, my understanding for how that happens is perhaps a little unique from the average person. Like I 1000% believe in the great man theory. I believe that there are individuals out there without whom society would not move forward in the same level that it is. And my job is to help find and cultivate those people. And, there are the same way there are 10x engineers, there are, 10 to 100x to 1000x of everything. And my greatest service is in helping, find and guide those people, even if it's only 1% of the population at the end of the day. The benefits of me doing that do, I believe, flow through to everybody. And there will be opportunities to, move to other areas of the economy and help other folks out. But right now we're tiny, right? We round to zero in the scheme of everything from a recruiting standpoint. We've first year we're talking 300, 400 people max. That's like one division of one division of one division at one company. That's tiny. Even as we scale, a couple thousand people a year, that's still a rounding error. Even at some universities, that's a rounding error relative to a graduate class, right? It's still really, really small. But I think we're trying to be in the most impactful part of the economy and the world that we can possibly be in. And I think the ripple effects of that will ripple pretty far and pretty hard. So we'll have to see. I don't know how big of a dent we'll make in the universe, but I think doing what we're doing, even in the little world that we're doing it in, will matter in the long run.